His name is Sonny Moore, but to his millions of fans, he's known as Skrillex, the king of the dubstep.
What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock NBA, and if you turn back the clock to 2013, people still posted pictures of their lunch to Instagram. We thought finger mustache tattoos were absolutely hilarious, and the biggest thing in music was this new sound called EDM. In particular, this version of it. Dubstep was absolutely everywhere, and Skrillex was synonymous with it. He was a rock star playing to tens of thousands of people every night, and everybody either wanted to be him or be his friend. But before he was Skrillex, he was just Sonny Moore, the singer of an emo band called From First to Last, who you may remember as one of the kind of earlier bands in the wave of quote-unquote mall screamo. But at the same time that he was riding an absolute tsunami of success, he was also one of the single most hated musicians on the entire planet. Depending on who you asked, he was either responsible for killing the genre of dubstep, or maybe even music in general. As one person even said, the Holocaust pales in comparison to him. So how did he transform from emo kid Sonny Moore to Skrillex, the world famous DJ? And was all the hate for him justified? Or in hindsight, was he actually one of the most influential, talented artists of his generation? And most importantly, what's with all his Burzum shirts? Those are the questions that I will answer in this video. And also, I'd like to thank Factor for sponsoring this video. If you're super busy with summer plans, but you still want to eat well, and you should, then check out Factor. They make nutritious, chef-prepared meals that are delivered straight to your door and are ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Which means you can skip the trip to the grocery store and all the chopping and prepping and cleanup and all the other reasons that I hate cooking, but you still get the flavor and nutrition that you need. And if you eat out a lot, honestly, it's a great way to save money. It's cheaper than takeout. It's way cheaper than restaurants, which I don't know if you've noticed how expensive they are these days, but in my personal opinion, they're kind of a ripoff. And Factor has a ton of options. For example, Calorie Smart, which is around 550 calories per serving. Protein Plus, which has more than 30 grams of protein. They've also got vegan and veggie, and their fancy new surf and turf options. Personally, what I like about Factor is that I don't have to think about what to eat for lunch. I know that I can just pick something, heat it up, and it's gonna taste good, and I'm also gonna hit my macro goals. So if you want to check out Factor, and honestly, I think you should, head to factor75.com or click the link in the description below and use the code PUNK50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. And to answer all those questions, I need to start at the beginning. Skrillex was born as Sonny Moore in 1988, and after being adopted by a Scientologist couple, he moved to LA, dropped out of high school, and decided to dedicate his life to music. He started making music at the age of 13 when he downloaded a cracked copy of FL Studio, but his introduction to the world at large was back in 2004 at the age of just 16. He had become a fan of a new post-hardcore band called From First to Last, and after hitting them up on MySpace and hanging out with them for a little bit while they were in the studio, they asked him to join the band. Initially as their guitarist, but after hearing him sing, they decided he would actually be better as the frontman.
I found this band, I met them online, and I flew out to see them. They were called From First to Last. I did that record with them when I was 16 and then spent about 2.5 years touring with them.
His debut was their first full-length album, Dear Diary, My Teen Angst Has a Body Count. And the album wasn't a huge success, but still there was something about it that stood out. I remember hearing it at the time, and even though emo itself wasn't really new, there was something about them that felt kind of special, important, and different. And apparently I wasn't the only one who felt that way, because after that album came out, they connected with the legendary producer Ross Robinson, best known for being the godfather of nu metal, and working with bands like Korn, Limp Bizkit, and Slipknot to record From First to Last's second album, Heroin. And although the band was taking off, playing Warped Tour, and touring with bands like Fall Out Boy and Hawthorne Heights, Sonny himself was struggling. He had to get surgery after damaging his voice from screaming every night with probably poor technique, and as he put it, singing's not my real passion. which in hindsight makes a lot of sense, but at the time came as a huge surprise to all the emo fans who only knew him as a vocalist. And so he abruptly announced that he was quitting From First to Last to pursue a new career as a solo artist. A move that almost everybody in the scene thought was a huge mistake, because From First to Last was clearly on the upward trajectory, and back then there was no real pathway for somebody to go from being the frontman of an emo band to a successful solo artist. And his first release as a solo album was an EP called Gypsy Hook, under just the name Sonny, that was kind of an odd halfway point between From First to Last and his later music. And the EP actually wasn't a huge hit, and it sounds like the label wasn't necessarily in love with it, which is indirectly how Sonny became Skrillex. Skrillex was really just a vehicle intended as a way to stay active and keep putting out music while his label decided what they wanted to do with him. As he later said, "I made another alias to do on the side where I would just release stuff for free, DJ, and tour on my own for free while Atlantic was just kind of shelving everything. I just had to call it something else. The name Skrillex doesn't really mean anything, it was just an old AOL Instant Messenger alias." Another big early track for him was his remix of The Sadness Will Never End by Bring Me the Horizon. I can't believe it's yesterday, which led to him putting out his debut EP under the name Skrillex, called My Name is Skrillex, as a free download on his MySpace, which wasn't huge, but definitely did turn some heads. And it did set him up for his big breakthrough, which was the Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites EP. That EP was released on the site Beatport through deadmau5's label Mousetrap, again without any real support from his label Atlantic. As he said, "We actually approached them to release the Skrillex stuff from the beginning and they wouldn't. So we said, fuck it, we'll give it out for free and people are gonna get shit for free anyway." And this was the beginning of the dubstep era, not just for him, but really for the world in general. And as I'm sure a lot of people are typing in the comments right now, dubstep itself was definitely not new. It had been around for several years before this, but it was mostly a European movement that grew out of the British jungle and garage scene in the late 90s and early 2000s, with artists like Burial. So it wasn't necessarily new to the world, but it was new to 99.9% of Americans, especially Skrillex's version of that sound, which was much more aggressive and intense than the UK version that had been around before. To give you an idea of what I mean, compare this classic UK dubstep track by Burial to Skrillex's version, which the dubstep purists started calling brostep, which by comparison kind of sounds like two cartoon fire engines crashing into each other, but in a cool way. And looking back on it, this stuff was actually incredibly aggressive and not actually that accessible, but somehow pretty much everybody from scene kids to normie college girls who just wanted to party loved it. Skrillex's EP hit number 49 on Billboard and helped put the genre of dubstep on the map for an American audience, which ended up being much bigger than the UK scene that created the genre. And from there, Skrillex's career took off like a rocket ship as dubstep officially became the coolest trend in music. He had his first real hit with a remix of Cinema by Benny Benassi, which not only won a Grammy for Best Remix, but also a shout out from Kanye West. And this was pre-Alex Jones Kanye, when that was still considered a good thing. He also joined Korn on stage at Coachella for 2 songs, and produced several songs on their new album The Path of Totality, which included a lot of dubstep influences. Shut the fuck up, get up. Shut the fuck up, get up. And to work with a legendary metal band like Korn was an absolutely huge cosign for him. And in hindsight, it's actually pretty amazing that in the same year, he could have success working with 2 just radically different artists as Benny Benassi and Korn. That's some pretty serious artistic range. And by 2012, he was easily headlining shows at 10,000 capacity venues, making appearances on the list of the world's richest DJs, and he had become the poster boy for EDM in general, as dubstep made its way into songs by mainstream pop artists like Katy Perry and Rihanna.
At just 27, Skrillex has become the most visible face and haircut of EDM, electronic dance music. a genre Rolling Stone says is defining this decade's youth culture.
And to say that he was on a hot streak would be a massive understatement. He had his first Billboard Top 10 song with Bangarang, he was dating Ellie Goulding, and even did a song with his favorite band The Doors between winning 5 Grammys in a single year, and in 2014 releasing his debut album Recess, which hit the Billboard charts at number 4.
Drop the bomb.
But for as much success as he was having, he got just as much backlash, catching, honestly, a massive amount of hate from several different directions at once. The first group that turned on him was dubstep purists, who hated his influence on dubstep and electronic music in general. Essentially, their issue was that he turned dubstep from a genre that was, for lack of a better word, kind of a nerdy thing like techno, into the soundtrack for frat boys to party. As one DJ at the time put it in an interview, dubstep in the US has taken the place of nu metal, and electronic music rave in America now is like a Limp Bizkit concert 10 years ago. If you listen to a Skrillex set, it's basically just an orgasmic reaction every 3 minutes. It has little to do with what dubstep was really about, which was sort of a meditation on bass. Now it's like a caricature of that in the US. And that wasn't necessarily wrong. He really did change the scene. But I have to think that a lot of that was coming from a place of envy. You really got the sense that they felt like him and the American scene in general had somehow stolen the spotlight that these other producers thought they deserved. And it is true that after he blew up, a lot of honestly douchey people got into DJing because they thought it would be an easy way to look cool, get girls, and maybe even get rich. Which is basically the plot of the Zac Efron movie about DJs called We Are Not Your Friends.
SATs, liberal arts, student loans, layoffs, bailouts, broken dreams. This is not our future.
And it's always a sign that a subculture is getting played out when Hollywood comes along and makes a movie about how cool it is. Like the grunge-themed rom-com Singles back in the early 90s.
You rock my world.
Singles.
If I make this basket, that's fate telling me to call him.
As the British dubstep pioneer Scream said, I think it hurts a lot of people over here because it's a UK sound, but it's been someone with influences outside the original sound that has made it a lot bigger. And you see this same kind of dynamic anytime somebody comes along who blows up and becomes the face of what was previously an underground subculture. For example, when Bam Margera blew up in the 2000s, the old guard said that he ruined skateboarding by bringing all these posers and corporate sponsors into the sport.
Yo, Bam here, gonna show you how new right guard extreme power stripe works.
And to be honest, there was some truth to that. If you went to a skate park around that time, there were hordes of annoying 12-year-olds that showed up at the park because they saw Bam on MTV and they wanted to be like him. But I think in hindsight, we always look back on these people and those moments in time and realize that actually these kind of people who become the face of a subculture are actually incredibly valuable and important because ultimately they are the ones who grow the scene. And at the end of the day, a rising tide lifts all boats. Like how Bam Margera sold millions of boards for Element that enabled them to take that money and sponsor younger skaters that otherwise might not have gotten a deal. And with millions and millions of kids discovering electronic music from Skrillex, if even one of them went on to listen to something like Pendulum, well, that's a good thing, right? And even if there are some douchey people who got into the scene because they saw all the money and fame that he was getting and they wanted a piece of that, is that Skrillex's fault? I mean, he never told them to do that. So I'm not really sure that it's fair to judge him for the actions of all these douchebags who bought a DJ controller because they wanted to look cool in front of girls. And there was also a ton of hate for him from the rock world, with most of that basically boiling down to the idea that he wasn't a real musician because all he did was push buttons. Which is kind of ironic because I'm sure most of these people had no idea that he actually did get his start playing in a rock band. But honestly, that's just kind of a dumb, ignorant thing to say that reveals that these people actually don't really know anything about music at all. The truth is that producing electronic music takes just as much effort and talent as any other genre, and learning how to do sound design as creatively as Skrillex does is honestly no different than learning guitar or drums. Ableton Live is really kind of its own instrument. And again, I think a lot of this was just jealousy. There were a million articles back then about how the DJ was the new rock star. And honestly, that was kind of true. The DJs did steal the spotlight. Skrillex, Steve Aoki, and Avicii really were the Guns N' Roses, Nirvana, and Metallica of the early 2010s. And the old rockers just didn't like that.
It's easy for people that feel like they don't understand something to immediately bash it because they feel insecure that they don't understand what's cool and what's new.
With all of that being said, Skrillex didn't let any of that slow him down and started maybe his biggest project yet, which was Jack U with Diplo.
I'ma show you out to love again.
And was eventually a huge part of turning Justin Bieber's career around from being this sort of laughingstock into now a respected artist by co-writing the song Sorry with him for Justin's album Purpose, which I think in hindsight people look at as a pretty amazing album. He also did songs with some of the absolute biggest stars in pop, like Lady Gaga, Beyonce, and Mariah Carey, as well as starting his own label Owsla, and he eventually got back with From First to Last in 2017 at Emo Night, and for a new song, which was actually really good.
If you give a fuck enough, you may run.
But the big question is, what is his lasting impact and legacy? There are lots of other people who could probably talk about his impact on electronic music better than I can, so I'm just going to kind of leave that alone. But what really stands out to me is that he created this connection between alternative and electronic music that really didn't exist before. Of course, there was always some crossover. For example, Bass Nectar was in a death metal band called Pale Existence, who put out a 7-inch back in the 90s on Max from Spaz's label. Steve Aoki was deep in the 90s hardcore scene. And there were these weird moments like how Cash Cash went from being just this absurd neon pop punk band to becoming big room EDM DJs. But those were kind of oddities. And Skrillex really showed the world that there was this whole other lane of aggressive electronic music that had kind of the same culture and energy as metal or post-hardcore, that had nothing to do with all the corny aspects of EDM that most of us probably don't like, and that actually a lot of people from the electronic music scene, especially bass music, come from metal. For example, Zedd played drums in a pretty cool progressive metal band. Big Chocolate has his death metal project, Disfiguring the Goddess. Borgore did an Asking Alexandria remix. And now there's the whole death step and metal step scene with artists like Sullivan King, Kayzo, Phase 1, and my personal favorite, Blue Pill.
Break the fucking bitch!
And in hindsight, that may seem like kind of an obvious progression because really it's the same music, only the synths are doing the guitar parts, the drums are programmed. It's not really as different as it seemed at the time, but it wasn't really obvious until Skrillex and those other artists proved it to us. Before that, metal and alternative music basically wanted nothing to do with electronic music of any kind. And until Skrillex came along, there was really no template for what it looked like for them to work together. And for a while, it looked like he might be another one of these people who was just insanely talented and burned really bright, but flamed out fast because he kind of fell off the map for a while and hinted at having some kind of personal issues. But he came back this year from that long break with not one, but 2 albums back to back. And the really insane part is that he's been making music for 20 years, but he is only 35. And with his work ethic, I think we have many, many decades ahead of creativity and innovation from Sonny Moore. All right, my friends, that does it for this video. As always, let me know what you think in the comments, and I would like to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. Patrons get all my podcasts and videos early. There are members-only channels in my Discord that I'm super active in. I do giveaways, and there's also a way to have me review your music. So if any of that sounds cool to you, hit the link in the description of this video, and with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.